Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Real inspiration for real innovators. If you're looking for innovation and leadership transformation, your journey starts now.
Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Born. Look, if you're enjoying these innovation insights, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss a future episode. By following the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast, you will stay at the forefront of trends, strategies, and real world examples that guide today's innovators. And I'm so excited for our guest today, Scott Millson. A little bit about Scott. He is a mostly retired executive. He's an author, a keynote speaker, and he helps people find the frequency of excellence and grow as leaders. So with his experience ranging from the US Navy to being a founder, we're going to talk about practical insights, some of his leadership life lessons, and he is the author of Frequency of Excellence. Welcome to the podcast, Scott.
Thanks so much for having me, Natalie. It's great to be here.
All right. Well, I am so excited to have you. I'd love to start with your brand new book, Frequency of Excellence. I'd love to know what inspired you to write the book and how are you defining excellence for leaders today?
Yeah. So there were probably three things that kind of hit me all about the same time that caused me to want to write the book. And so the first one was a book that I read. I'm an avid reader, as you can kind of see over my shoulders. I just love pouring into, having people pour into me and read their books, et cetera. So there's one book, there was a blog that I had started. And then finally, I think it was kind of getting older and being nostalgic. So, take those in reverse. And so, for me, as I was getting older in life and more mature in my career, I started having this wave of nostalgia, just this great deal of gratitude that I had for all the people that had poured into me. Wow. And allowed me to kind of be my best. And so I just had this moment of just this deep gratitude. And I felt like, I wanted to share that back with people. And then COVID hit. So I was like, at the very beginning of that, everybody was looking to grasp different things. And so for me, it was that gratitude. And I said, you know what, I want to share all the lessons that were shared with me, I want to share with others. And so I started a blog. I started a blog post on LinkedIn, and I called it 30ish for 30. So I kind of turned the corner of my 30th year of professional service. And I said, I got 30 lessons I want to share. And so
That's really powerful.
I just mapped them out and I started sharing those out, and I was getting great feedback from people. They were like, wow, this is really good. And, there was two reasons why I did it. One was to shine a light on those people, to say thank you. But the second was I wanted to share those lessons back with others, because it doesn't make any sense for me just to hold them in. So I wanted to share those. And so I started doing that. And then the third one was I read a book, Dr. Arthur Brooks, a brilliant social scientist, Harvard professor of happiness. He wrote a book called From Strength to Strength. And in that book, he talks about, we have two curves of our life. And in our first curve, we are striving to be the absolute best that we can be. So whatever that is, the best leader, salesperson, manager, consultant, you're striving to do that. You're trying to climb the corporate ladder and you're working on your resume virtues. He said, but if you don't find a second curve, that first curve will begin to drop. Like you will lose energy, enthusiasm. He calls it fluid intelligence versus crystallized intelligence. Like it's going to drop the older that we become. And he said, you have to find a second curve onto which you jump. And so for me, I found that second curve, and it was, I wanted to help others and encourage others to grow. And so that really became kind of my why, to use a Simon Sinek-ism. I wanted to be, that was my why, is I wanted to pour into others and encourage them. And so I said, you know what, I got these ideas for the book and they're kind of in that blog. So let's turn it into something. So that's what I did.
Yeah. It's interesting, just to comment on how you got to a book. I think that is a really impactful way to get to a book. I think when people think about 30 years of being in business or 30 years in a specific career, and then they think about sitting down and writing a book, it can feel insurmountable. Yeah. But the way that you did it is you actually kind of broke it up into smaller pieces. Yeah. And then when you bring it all back together, it's like, we've got a book. And I think that's a really impactful way to think about some of the life lessons. You talk a lot about the excellence that operates at a certain frequency that we have to tune into to experience. Yeah. I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit more. Like, right now leaders are experiencing so much pressure and complexity in the work that they do. What does it really look like to tune into that frequency that allows you to operate at a level of excellence that maybe most people don't tap into?
Yeah. So I I had a mentor. And so I've always had kind of a growth mindset. For me personally, I'm an everyman, right? I'm a career B student, and I knew that I was going to have to outwork and outlearn people. And so from the jump of professional service, I was like, I have to have a growth mindset. And so I had a mentor that shared with me this metaphor that ultimately became the title of my book, and really shed a light on how I kind of lived my life and how I, had my career. And that is that excellence surrounds us. So it is out there ready for us to be able to see it, but we got to be tuned into the right frequency in order to pick it up. So for me, I grew up in a small North Florida town, and my favorite radio station was Rock 104 out of Gainesville, Florida. And it was 103.7 on the radio dial. So I'm gonna age myself when I say this, but you remember that right-hand knob of a car stereo was a tuner. And in order to get 103.7 in my car, I had to play with that knob to get it there. And so the music was out there. I just had to find it. And if I slid past it, I was at 103.9. I got static. You don't get it. 103.5, you get static. But if you hit 103.7, then boom, Tom Petty came streaming through the radio. And so excellence is a lot like that it's out there. It's out there for us to pick up on, but we got to have the right mindset tuning in to be able to hear it. And I'll give you an example. So I was about fifth year, I was working for an organization, was a global consulting company, very, very well respected. And I was about my fifth or sixth year. So I was kind of an associate of sorts, striving to become a partner. And I was working with this senior partner, and we had a meeting in New York City, and we were sitting in a small conference room, and we were running through the various topics that we were going to say. And he asked me a question. He said, if they ask you X, how are you going to respond? And I started in this long drawn out soliloquy, and I was using big words and buzzwords and all these catchphrases and consulting speak, and never really I was just meandering. And about midway through, I watched him kind of say something under his breath. And I stopped at the end of it after I finished, and I said, you said something there. What did you say? And he was very polite, and he said to me, I said a Latin phrase. And I said, well, I don't even speak Latin or pig Latin, help me out. And he said, I said et loqueris ad. And I was curious. I said, what does that mean? And he goes, speak with a purpose. And he said, you can't just fill the air with words. You got to have a thesis to your words. You have to have an objective of where you're trying to take the audience. And he said, so, you need to have some type of a currency to your words and treat them as such. And so, this really wasn't a thing back then, but if you remember Michael Scott in his improvisation in the office, that's what I was doing. And my mentor just very gently shared that with me. But if I wasn't tuned into that frequency, I would have just thought, well, that's kind of annoying. The guy just muttered something, and I would have moved on, right? And I never would have gotten that life lesson. From that moment forward, I had a life lesson. It changed how I communicated. Everything I was then trying to do on a go-forward basis, whether I was presenting, proposing something to a customer, trying to resolve a problem, whatever it was, talking with an employee about, where I wanted them to go, I had a guide for my words. And so that's kind of an idea of that frequency. I would have missed it if I wasn't dialed into his frequency and really curious about what he had said.
Well, even zooming out, the curiosity in that moment to even notice his body language, to notice that maybe he wasn't responding the way you were hoping he was going to respond to what you're saying. I think that those are the small nuances of why coaching is so important, why mentorship is so important, because you need somebody to, for example, I'm working with somebody who's much younger in their career right now. They just started a business, and they're doing some things that are violating trust. Now, I know they're not a person that's not a person of trust or honor, but because they're younger, they're really missing some key cues here that are things that build trust. They're actually doing things that are eroding trust. Right. So we're getting ready to have that hard conversation. But those are the conversations that shape people into the future of oh man, I remember that moment that someone cared enough to stop and turn back and say, let me help you. Let me help you grow in this area. Let me help you build in a way that's actually going to make you more effective for the long haul.
Yeah, we all need those accountability partners, right? Whether it's a mentor, whether it's a coach, whether it's a manager, whether it's a leader, we all need that in our lives. And what's really important for us is we got to recognize that as we grow in our careers, we're that for others, right? Mm-hmm. So then we're looking for that, to go back to my first versus second curve. in that first curve, I was sponging. I was taking all those lessons,
Yeah.
and now I'm just squeezing the sponge and I'm sharing them back out with others. And you're doing the same as you meet with your clients. And we got to pour into others as much as people have poured into us.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the drift, right? If you're a leader listening to this and you're thinking, okay, at one point we were dialed in as a team. Like we kind of knew what our frequency of excellence looked
Mhm.
like. We were firing on all cylinders.
Yeah.
But now we're starting to, maybe some things are declining. Talk to them about what are some signals that they can see that, that piece of frequency of excellence kind of declining in their own world. And then how should leaders respond to kind of get people back on track and get everyone refocused on the vision, the mission, right? The values of where they're headed.
Yeah, so I love the question because the focus there is on the people, not necessarily on the results or the outcome or anything else. It's on the people. And so I think as leaders, we have to be dialed into the frequency of our employees, right? The people that are under our care. We need to understand what they're doing and how they're acting and reacting, et cetera. That's one. The second thing is I think anytime that I've ever experienced that where I feel like the team is drifting or we're losing our North Star and we're just not dialed in. The very first thing I do, and this was again shared with me by a mentor, is I look inward. I look inward because as a leader, I'm a force multiplier and an amplifier for how my team is going to act and react. And if my team is not quite there or we're not quite aligned, that's a me problem, not a them problem. As a leader, we have to recognize that that's our issue and we need to kind of look inward to try to figure out what are we doing. And so, a force multiplier, most people are probably familiar with the term. I come from a military background, so I kind of have that sense. But it's essentially, what is that factor that enhances the effectiveness of something beyond its inherent capabilities? And as leaders, we are force multipliers. I remember I was driving around town one time with one of my mentors. He owned a barbecue empire, if you will, in Florida, and I was lucky enough to be driving around with him one day. He was going from location to location, and he said to me, when I walk into one of the smokehouses and I see the team and I start interacting with the team, I can predict how that leader, whether the manager of that store is in a good mood or a bad mood. He said,
Wow.
because if the team is going around kicking dirt and they're just kind of working through their task and there's no energy, he said, I will guarantee that the manager is in a foul mood.
Wow.
And he said, if I walk in and I see them dancing around and everybody, the music is blaring and everybody's kind of getting ready for the day and ready to interact with customers, he goes, I can predict that the manager is in a great place. And he said, it was a great lesson for me that oftentimes we look at our teams as, how they're acting is just a reflection of how we're acting and reacting. And, the Navy SEALs nail it when they say calm is contagious. That's what they look for in their SEALs is they want calm because they need their, people in their unit to be calm. And if they as a leader are losing their minds and acting and reacting and overreacting, guess what your team's going to be? They're going to be acting, reacting, and overreacting. So you've got to have that mentality that you as a leader, we are force multipliers.
And that's an incredible way to think about you as the leader are the mirror for what the organization looks like. And so even just, hearing some of those examples that you shared it's a very insightful way to get a feel, right? If you're not in that building every day, if you're not in that office every day to walk in and get a feel for what it's like because
Yeah.
the people that are working there reflect the leader that they work for.
Yeah.
And
100%.
that's huge, right?
Yeah, they're taking their cues from us, and we got to recognize that frequency of excellence is a dual signal, right? So I want to be able to pick up the signals from others, but I got to recognize people are watching me, and that frequency is going to be picked up by others, especially as we hit certain levels of leadership. That is a dual signal. We got to recognize we're impacting others as much as we're being impacted.
You talk a lot about the impact of female mentors on your leadership development.
Mhm.
I'd love to talk about that a little bit, and even for some of the ladies that are listening out there. I find in the leaders that I work with more frequently than not, women are less likely to have mentors or even be a mentor than their male counterparts. So I think this is a really important conversation because not only are women mentored a lot less than men, they're also less likely to mentor others just because again you model what you've been shown. So if
Yeah.
that hasn't been modeled for you to have a mentor, oftentimes you don't think about turning back around and mentoring others. So I'd love to talk a little bit about some of your
Sure.
lessons and some of the perspective that has shaped you in this area.
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that because I touch on this a little bit in my book. And so, I believe that leadership doesn't have a gender necessarily. And yet at the same time, I was very positively impacted by many female leaders that I was fortunate to work with. And so, personally in my life, I was raised by a strong woman. I married a strong woman and I'm raising a strong woman. And so I recognize the importance of that. And so I was so fortunate because the first employer that I worked for, this company, Hewitt Associates that I mentioned earlier, when I first joined them, this was 1989, 1990. So like this is going back a ways. And the first manager I had was a male, but his boss was a female. His boss's boss was a female, and the boss's boss's boss was a female. And that struck me as just this is an organization that doesn't necessarily look and say, what's the gender, et cetera. They're just saying who's the best person.
Yeah.
And so I was so positively impacted by so many of the female leaders with whom I worked. And I did in my book, I wanted to shine a light on that and just highlight how they helped me. And they were so important because mentorship is critical. And I believe that in the United States today, we've got a bit of a gap. And I read a study that said that 80% of people recognize that mentorship is important. I don't know who the 20% is. Like that's for another podcast. But 80% of people believe that it's important, and only 37% of people actually have a mentor. And I think to your point, I think on the female side, it might even be less than that.
Mm-hmm.
And so my belief is, and I've done some research on this and a lot of talking with people, is I believe it's because people are looking for a formal relationship, for somebody to walk in and say, Natalie, you're going to mentor Scott. Scott meet Natalie, Natalie meet Scott. You're going to now be mentored. That's inorganic, right?
Yeah.
That's not necessarily, it's a forced relationship to some degree, and it may not be successful. When it is successful is when, like the organization I worked with, there were so many exceptional leaders and consultants and salespeople that if I aspired to a skill of somebody or aspired what they were doing, whether it was leadership, sales, et cetera, I just leaned in on that.
Yeah.
I was present with them. I was intentional. I was signing up for projects that they were doing that I wanted to be part of. And so I just leaned in on that and I would seek that out and I would try to learn from them. But it was always a very organic relationship that just developed over time. And so I probably had 50 mentors throughout my life, and many of them I highlight in my book. Not in any of those 50 did I go to somebody and say, will you please mentor me? It was just a relationship that formed, and it was very natural and very organic and exceptionally rewarding for me. And I think we need to encourage people to do that, especially I think women to mentor other women and pour into them. And I love it when I see that.
I think that you highlighted something really important with what you just said there, which is you never went and had that awkward, will you mentor me conversation. It happened really organically. You found somebody that you thought, man, they're ahead of me in this
Yeah.
area, or I'd love to learn from them in this area. And then I'd love to talk about how did you find a way to be around that person more so that
Yeah.
you could glean from them? Because maybe that's the key people need to pick up. It's not this awkward, hey, Scott, will you mentor me? But it's more of a, hey, Scott, I know next week you're going to do XYZ. Could I tag along and just learn from you? Tell me more
Yeah.
about that.
So I was highly intentional. I was highly intentional about the people with whom I surrounded myself. And so the choice of an organization, the choice of a project team, the choice of a leader under whom I wanted to work, I was very intentional with that. And so I would seek out people again that were doing something that I thought was exceptional. They were displaying excellence in everything that they did. And I would sign up for their projects. I had one time in particular, this was kind of crazy in retrospect that I did this. I was striving to make partner, and this organization was a global consulting company. Partnership was available. I made it. I finally made it about my 9th or 10th year of being with the organization. You think that should be like a crowning achievement and say, okay, wonderful, I've made it. About a month after I got brought into the partnership, I was asked to join a spinoff. We were going to spin this organization off, and I was so attracted to the people that were on that project, all these people that I had just a great respect for, et cetera, and how they did things and how they led, sold, their creativity, their curiosity, everything. I gave up my partnership to join that spinoff.
Wow.
Because I really wanted to be around those people. And it's a long story that you can read about in the book, but it didn't necessarily work out like that. We ultimately got folded back in it. We tried to hit the .com on the upswing and we caught it unfortunately on the downswing.
Yeah.
but it was one of the greatest experiences of my career because I surrounded myself with those people. And so I just think for anybody listening, I think you want to seek out and understand who those people are and then sign up for their projects. Make sure it might not happen immediately, but over time, sign up for their projects, work with them. Even if you're not directly reporting to them, set up time and say, hey, can we go grab a lunch? Can we grab coffee next week? Or, hey, if you're going to be in town, I'd love to rub elbows with you a little bit. Seek that out. And, again, over time, organic relationships develop and friendships develop.
Yeah, that's a really cool story. Years ago, I wrote a blog called Choose a Leader, Not a Job. I
Mhm.
think there's so much to what you're saying about
Yeah.
choosing who you want to surround yourself with. If you look at your relationships, we've heard this quote all the time, you are the sum of the five closest people that you hang out
Yeah.
with. I think that's true in the business setting too. So honestly, if we don't like what we're getting, it may be time to level up who we're spending time around and what we're spending time focusing on and who we're with, because
Right.
that ultimately orients everything you're talking about here. And I think it's so important that, we even take that time of reflection. Maybe at the end of this podcast, we need to spend just a couple minutes, maybe making the list. Who am I surrounding myself with?
Yeah.
Are those the right people?
Yeah.
And what do I need to change this year as I walk into a new year to make sure that I'm focused on, that frequency of excellence, because
Yeah.
you're not going to get it if you're hanging around. What is the old song, Scott? You might know this one. You hang around nine broke friends, you're bound to be the 10th, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's you want to soar with eagles, don't run with the turkeys. Iron sharpens iron. It's all those different things that come into it. Or show me the five people you spend the most time with, I'll show you your future. Like all those adages are there for a reason. And
Mhm.
I do think that sometimes we need to think about there's addition through subtraction as well. So if you're surrounding yourself with the turkeys
Mhm.
and you know that, and they're bringing you down, bounce, like figure out a way to, may not be immediate, but find a way over time to either surround yourself with people within the organization or even outside of the organization that begin to lift you up.
Yeah.
So that way you've got some of that addition versus subtraction.
So good. Okay, so leaders who are listening and they want to raise their standard over the next 90 days. I know we gave them one way they could do that by looking at who they're surrounding
Yeah.
themselves with. What are some other areas they should start and why?
Yeah, I think the number one underutilized superpower that we all have is curiosity. And I think curiosity is so underutilized today because we're just wrapped up in our little worlds, right? And whether it's the device that's sitting literally 2 inches from my hand right now or whatever, but we're just not curious enough. And so I think when we're present around these people, when you're intentional about the people with whom you surround yourself, you're present with them, truly present, not just like a thin veil of presence and you're thinking about what you got to get done. But the most important thing in that is be curious. And that just helps you lean in. When you're curious and you want to get to know that person more and you're truly, truly curious about them, the opportunity to grow and develop for you and for them is exceptional. And so I just think we got to continue to hone that curiosity skill, want to learn from people, want to have that right mindset that says I can grow, but I got to be curious and I got to be present with these people. But curiosity, I think, is if it's, anybody wants to come up with a buzzword for 2026 and that's what their word of the year is lean in on curiosity.
Wow, that's good. What would you say is your best curiosity question that you ask people if maybe you don't know them, right? Let's say you're walking up to somebody at a party or at a networking event. Like what's your favorite curiosity question?
Well, I'll get there, but I'm gonna tell you my least favorite is don't go up to somebody and ask them what they do for a living. Like
Yeah.
that is just to me, that is so trite. You're not really trying to get any depth with that. And to a degree, some would argue you're kind of shoehorning them like into where they are. And so I just think, don't do that. Resist the urge to ask somebody, what do you do for a living? But I think, the questions in that are related to that is, what excites you? Like what are you
Mm.
passionate about? Like, what is it that you're really passionate about as you head into 2026? You're going to start to uncover a whole host of things. You're going to really get to the true essence of the person to understand what is it that makes them get up in the morning? What is it that kind of gets them fired up to kind of, attack the day? You're not getting P&Ls. You're not getting, project things. You're not getting titles.
Yeah.
You're getting the innate things that make us human, that make us a good leader, that make us a good salesperson, that makes us a good manager. You're going to get to the true essence of a person. And so to ask those questions that get at that root versus the surface. Stay away from the surface, go deep. And then when they give you an answer, ask 3 more questions.
That's good.
Yeah, just keep drilling down on it. It's like Six Sigma. Remember the old Six Sigma?
Yes.
There's like, you had to ask 6 whys.
Yes.
Ask 6 whys. Like, why are you that way? Why does that create a passion for you? And then follow up with another why. And you're going to get down to real good roots.
Well, I love that you said that because it was not a story topper. Oh, you told me that story. Let me share one with you now.
Yeah.
It was literally staying in it and staying curious about their life, not trying to find a way to ask a question so you can get to talking to yourself, right?
Yeah. Well, you just hit 2 topics. Two of the chapters in my book, I talk about the one-upper, right? So I just said, when you one-up, it's when you're making it about you and not them. You're just one-upping. You're not intending to do it. And you're not nearly as obnoxious as Kristen Wiig was on Saturday Night Live, but you're one-upping somebody when you turn it and say, well, let me tell you the story about me, right? And then the other one is, there's a difference between listening and waiting your turn to speak. And too often people, especially on the sales side of things, you just can't wait to share your knowledge. And so whatever they're telling you, you're not hearing it because you just want to get that next knowledge, gem out there. And you got to resist that urge. So, again, curiosity and leaning in on others, I think is a superpower that we all need to better utilize.
That's awesome. Where can people find and follow you? Where can they find your book?
Yeah. So sold where any books are sold. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any of those. Frequency of Excellence is the title. And I appreciate it. Anybody that wants to take a read, and I'm an open book. So then I'll give you my email address and my LinkedIn. Reach out if you have any questions and say, hey, be curious, right? If you have a question about chapter 43, I don't know what you were really going with that one. Ask me the question. I'm love to talk about it. But so LinkedIn, I'm Scott Millson, Millson, and then my website is scottmillson.com. And would again welcome any opportunity to connect with anybody in your audience.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. This was amazing. And I feel like this is the perfect episode as we start a new year and think about the road ahead and how we can be really, really intentional with our leadership.
Amen. Yeah. Appreciate the opportunity to be on. Thanks, Natalie.
Awesome. Well, to our listeners, thank you for joining the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Remember, don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.
Thank you for joining us for the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our show on iTunes. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Innovation Meets Leadership, and visit our site at innovationmeetsleadership.com for more innovation resources.
Hey, my new book is out, Set It on Fire, The Art of Innovation. Click on the link to learn more. And don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.